For you.
It's great to see everybody today. You'll have to kind of bear with me. I've had kind of a rough spring so far. My speech is a little bit off. I had some problems with Bell's palsy on one side. Anything that isn't quite clear to you, don't be afraid to holler, raise your hand, or whatever, because again, I got caught off guard with this. But again, what we do when we're out in the field is we try to find out what's going on with the sounds that we hear.
Hang on, it's trying to.
Here, you're back a couple.
Yeah, it's.
Okay, what do we do when we're out in the field? I mean, I'd like to say that I know that I'm catching Bigfoot sounds, but the reality is there is no actual proven Bigfoot vocalizations. Why is that? Because we've never seen a Bigfoot make the vocalization. Not only that, until Bigfoot is actually proven to be an animal, there's no way that we can attribute it to an unknown animal. When we go out into the woods, the way that I handle it is I deal with unknowns. If there is other things out there in evidence, tracks, sightings, possible manipulations of the woods, that's when I start taking it into where it is a possible Bigfoot.
Hey, Randy, hang on just a second. Hey, folks, back there in the back, can y'all tone it down a little bit? They can't hear up front here. Okay.
Okay. I'm trying, but again, my voice is down, so why don't you go to the next screen there, Darren?
Yeah, I had to do some modifying on your.
What, I screwed it up again?
It was doing the auto.
Okay. You know, basically there's some sounds that have been purported with Bigfoot activity for years. I mean, the most common ones that came out of the 70s and early 80s were howls, screams, knocks, and of course they throw rocks. So those were the primary, when I came into this, that people were talking about. Howls, screams, knocks, and rocks. Well, there's no other critter in the country that only does those. Back about 3 years ago, I started putting together some research trying to figure out what do we call these things? What might they mean? If a Bigfoot is doing these type of vocalizations, why might they be doing that? And I started looking a lot at science, and science kind of did a nice job for me. They changed it. They got long calls and they got short calls. Anybody want to gather a guess of why they call them long calls? I always thought because they lasted forever. You know, when they'd make the vocalization, it was long, drawn out. Well, in science, it's not that way. Science in a long call, it means how far the vocalization will go. And short calls are how close you got to be in order to do it or hear them. That made a lot of sense with some other stuff I'll bring up about our Project Silent Hills had a lot to do with that. What I've got here is, again, you know, howls and screams. If they're unknown to a known animal, they go in that file of possibly being Bigfoot. The big difference between a scream and a howl is nothing more than tone. You know, if someone's scared and it's a high-pitched scream, we don't call that a howl. A wolf does more of the howling. We, expect that long, drawn-out, low tone. That's what we would think of a howl. But in essence, if they're a long call, they're basically the same thing. The others that I talk about here are, knocks, thumps. Sometimes they do human-like. It appears they do human-like. Where with mimicking, there's been lots of reports of them mimicking names, mimicking animals, and then again, some other more of the aggressive type of vocalizations that we hear. But again, the top two in this list fit in long calls, and that'll be the first screen we talk about. next screen there. Okay, back in 2013, I was lucky enough in Missouri to catch this first audio. I call it the Missouri Scream. Now, I recorded it. That's okay, I'll run. Of course, you can hear the owl in it too. Now, with that, did I shut this off? Blake, is that on?
It just means battery's low.
Okay. I recorded that the first time in November 2013. And again, that matches a lot of the reported Bigfoot vocalizations that happened out in Washington, Oregon. There's been some in Ohio and down south. They all seem to match that type of profile. They call it the Klamath Springs out in, or Klamath Screams out in Washington. Snohomish Scream was the same type of vocalization. In fact, when you put them up on a spectrogram, they are so close to each other, you couldn't tell if it was the Missouri one or the one in Washington. And this is a vocalization that, in Missouri anyway, I only catch in the fall, winter, and spring. Now, don't get me wrong, it could be happening in the summertime. I don't know. But what do we got around here in the summertime that we don't have in the winter? Tree frogs, cicadas, bugs. The ambient temperature outdoors raises so much during the summertime that because it was a long distance vocalization away from the recorder, we may not be picking it up. But in doing the studying with other primates, namely gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans, when they do these type of vocalizations that are a long distance vocalization, most of the time they have to do with food being found. Now, if you look at the wintertime during this area, the greens are gone. You know, so I surmise, and again, other than my own experiments there and not catching in the summertime, but I surmise that this may be a call for food. Whether they ended up, I don't know, a successful kill, or whether it was just they found some roadkill that was enough for everybody. And you know, there's been evidence that they spread out more in the wintertime looking for food than staying in centralized locations. And if that's the case, that I think is what that is. You know, part of what is neat when you're doing this in the same research area year after year after year is you can find these patterns in vocalizations. You know, to catch it one time is cool. To catch it two times is even cooler. But when you start being able to catch it time and time again, you know, number one, there's something in that area making those vocalizations, and number two, that they're staying in that area. Now, this next clip, don't play it yet, if you will, was in December one year. My daughter calls and says, you know, Dad, it's 23rd of December, we haven't wrapped any gifts, we gotta get rid of the kids, you guys take them for a night? I said, yeah, that's a good excuse to go to the woods. So I took the grandkids, we took another one out here, Bernie's granddaughter Piper, and we went out into the woods that night. as from time to time, what we'll do is we drop one vehicle off at the road, and Bernie will walk in to see if something comes up behind the truck, you know, that type of thing when we drive it. We had all the grandkids with us. That night, for the most part at camp, it was just dead quiet. We weren't getting anything that we would normally get if they were in the area. Around 9:30, Bernie decided, well, I'm going to walk over and get my truck and bring it back. Well, I just kind of helped the volunteer. How many kids want to go on a night hike with Bernie? And off they went. Well, my grandson stayed with me. He didn't want to go with the girls. But the girls went with them, and we used radios when we're out in the woods. I told Bernie when he gets someplace, radio me. I'm going to do a howl. And then I want the girls to scream back at me. We'll do that a time or two, see if we get a response anywhere else. And this next clip was, it's going to be short, but you'll be able to hear a scream, and then we start talking on radios, and we got a reply that night. That was the girls.
I heard something there, but again, it seemed real distant. Did they just do a second one?
So again, something answered that scream. You know, anybody that's drove around these old logging roads and stuff, you know, you don't go very fast. And it took Bernie a while to come back with his truck. Is that the second one or third one?
I think it's the same one.
Yeah, it is. Nope, it's leaving. This was the return. As they were driving back, this screamer continued to scream.
It
Was the first one. Okay. And again, when they were going to drive back, we had about 3 minutes of this thing still screaming at us, trying to get a return from the girls again. And when they got back to camp, we pretty well quit. But this is the one that was screaming on the way back. Go ahead with the third one, please.
The third one?
Yep. You can definitely hear the neighborhood dogs not liking this screaming going on too. One thing about the scream, we've caught it afterwards, but it always seemed to be when the girls or the kids were with us, it would initiate it. So does that make this a mimic? You know, at the time, that's what I was thinking. But the funny part about this is where they were sat over here with the truck when they did their screaming, the one we heard reply was over here. Hindsight is really good for a researcher, because I think if they would have stayed at that other truck, it would have come to them, because when it ended up in the same general area that the kids started their screaming at. What does it mean? You know, I don't know. I wish I did know. But it was a long distance vocalization, because it carried for a long, long way. Now, again, up until recently, I was thinking that this was a mimic. But then I was lucky enough, January this year, I put out a drop box in an area that I've had activity before, but just due to the type of access necessary to get there, I don't research much. and I left drop boxes out overnight, and the last one was caught. The funny thing is, it was caught about 6 a.m. first. Then all of a sudden, the next thing I know, at 9:30 in the morning, this one came up. Go ahead, please. That background noise is a spring that I had set up next to it. You notice the second one joined in there? That's the second vocalizer. And you can hear the first one, it seems like it's fading away. And then at the end here, it gets soft enough you can barely hear it. So now, after catching that, not only, this location was probably 6 miles as the crow flies from where the other one was recorded, which again, as far as a creature this size, I mean, 6 miles a hop, skip, and a jump. You know, the roads that get there take a lot longer, but, you know, I thought it was a mimic because of our vocalization trying to get it to pull in. But then what was causing it? What was it trying to mimic? I have a sneaky feeling that that also is a common vocalization. It's just one that I haven't recorded very much. It does match some that we've heard down here in Oklahoma pretty well. Screams are something that does happen. We found some down in Folk that sounded a lot like that when we have expeditions down there. But this one definitely had 2 vocalizers, and this was during the day. This clip was at 9:30 in the morning, about an hour before I went and picked up that recorder. So that, in my respects, tells me that number one, they're not just at night. I already knew that, but you know, it works to be out during the day too. You can get vocalizations during the day. You don't just have to be out at night. Next screen, please. Now, another thing that we hear a lot, I don't really call it a vocalization, but it's a sound, knocks. It's a very, very common thing to hear people talk about is knocks. A lot of people were thinking it was the same way we do it. We hit a tree or something, and I've really gotten to really question that, and this will show you why. For the first 3 years in my research area, we never knocked, we never replied, we never howled, we never did anything. In 2014, I recorded something in the woods mimicking me, what I was saying. It wasn't a big long sentence. And I did it here a few years ago on one of the presentations where I'd say beep, 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 trying to make a backup alarm sound. And there was something 4 times. I said it 4 times that night, explaining it to my partner about what I had heard and that I thought it was mimic. And 4 times that night, something in the woods repeated right after me. When I'd quit talking, it would say beep, beep, beep. So for me, that was a game changer. If they can mimic me and make fun of me, game on. Okay, that is when a lot of things started to change. We started mimicking their knocks. When they'd knock once, we'd knock. Now, I had caught knocks before going through the woods. And the thing about it was, to me, it seemed like there was more than one going through the woods, and they were keeping track of each other that way. Because the tones of the knocks, between 2 or 3 knocks that were consistent, didn't change. I mean, in other words, one had one sound, one had another, and the third had a third. And it never changed in tone as it was going through. So for me, that was a location way of locating each other. So when they'd get up and start their knocking game, okay, now we can play too. And that's exactly what we started doing. You know, I've heard a lot of people say, well, that knock's got to be a gunshot, listen to this, listen to that. This first clip was going to show what happens when we did actually find a good piece of wood. And I'll give a challenge to anybody. You go out in the woods tonight and you pick up a stick off the ground and hit a tree with it. 99% of them you pick up are going to break because they're dead rotten. They don't make much sound. This night we happened to pick up a chunk of oak about that big around that did make some sound. But when you listen to this clip, listen to the one that starts the game and notice that even though it's moving, the tone of the knock is not changing. Go ahead with the first clip, please. Again, that was the knock that was started the game that night.
So, try to hit the other side of the tree, that doesn't increase.
Those were ours. You notice how quick it's returning? Yeah, the one that we use is different, and we can't get it to...
Well, basically, it's kind of dead in front of the truck before you come through. Now it seems to be, you look at the truck and move more towards the 2 o'clock area. If I'm hearing it correctly.
Now again, this is at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And again, this was the first time we played the what we call a knock-knock game with them. You know, they were moving. You could hear them talk. It started here and it seemed to end up here. It was moving. And the tone of their knock or whatever they're doing didn't change. You could hear that stick that we had picked up off the ground. That did better than most we pick up off the ground. And it was shortly after this that we got the results accidentally and put together the Silent Hills project between the MABRC and APES, and found out knocks this loud, they're not a long distance or sound. Knocks in the Ozarks, correct me if I'm wrong, unless you're listening for them, you won't hear them much over 600 feet. When they get out 900 feet, unless you are dead quiet and actually listening for them, you won't hear them. To have them this loud at camp, I'm now thinking they were probably within 100 foot of us. But we were thinking they were a ways away. That's part of the reason why we stayed so dang calm. At that time, realizing we can't get a decent stick in the woods to make a knock with, we went out and I bought some pickaxe handles, and that was what our knocking tool became. Now, during the Silent Hills project, we also found out that you can hit any type of tree you want with the same stick, and it won't sound different other than volumes. The pitch or the tone that you're hearing comes off the stick you're using to hit with. It doesn't come off the tree. So using that knowledge also, if they're making the same tone and they're actually hitting a tree with a stick, they'd have to be carrying it with them. We would have a lot more reportings and sightings of, yeah, can you stop that please? Again, you deal with someone that's used to the woods there, not computers. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
You know, we found out that it was a stick that made the tones. It wasn't, you know, anything else. With these guys not having their sticks and reports of them carrying clubs to hit trees with, it goes back to how in the heck can they be doing this? We started looking at the thought of, you know, hand claps, all sorts of stuff. Then the next few games, they caught on after we got those axe handles because they sound the same every time. We were dumb enough to identify ourselves by trying to outsmart them to get something that would carry noise. Then they started playing the game of let's see if it's them. And to start with, it was just some rapid fire ones that were off in the distance because we couldn't keep up. The game ended. They wouldn't come in. This next clip that we'll play here in a second was one of those nights that started off as a regular knock. And we replied. And then you're going to hear this odd tone that comes up where it's two different tones, two different knocks in succession. And how they can do this, I still don't know. Go ahead, let's go ahead and run that one there. That's ours. We're trying to keep up. You know, what do you make out of something like that? I mean, again, it started off as a normal knock-knock game, and then it went to that double hit or double knock, double tone. You could hear when we were using our knocking stick that other than the volume, because we were hitting higher and lower in the tree to try to change the tone wouldn't change. Not like the tone did for them. So that again puts back, what are we using, what capabilities do they have for making these sounds that we don't have a clue over? You know, and it just befuddles a person because again, they caught on that quickly. I bet it wasn't 3 times without the axe handle or using those axe handles before we were getting stuff like this. And again, it is back in the middle of nowhere, and again, it's in a location where there's nobody around. I don't know what it is, but they do seem to interact with us and mess with us. But again, I'm in my 9th year out there. You know, I mean, we've dealt with this troop for quite a while. And it wasn't until they mimicked that I decided to play the game with them, and that came up. Now this next clip, we were over in a place we call Tired Ridge, which is again about 4 miles out as a crow flies. And that side of a barrier we thought was a different troop. The markers were a bit different, this and that. I'm not exactly sure if we got overlap area or what's going on there. But we thought, okay, we're gonna go over there. Go ahead and let it go. And this is what we got. That was their knock.
Try to hit the other side of the tree.
So I started off the first one again there and shut that down for you. We try to keep up with it. We can.
Try to hit the other side of the tree.
There's more than one plane. That was kind of mixing them up. Again, sorry about that there, and that's if they're knocking, how could they, if they're actually knocking, how could they do that? We tried to keep up with them, we can't. And that basically ended that game right then and there. And I don't know if you guys were noticing or not, and I didn't until I got dang went through all this audio on review. I missed one of that last time.